So I want to keep the remarks brief so I can hand it over to others, but I did want to thank first Black Gotham Experience and Kamau Ware, who's really been the genius behind this project. I was first introduced during one of his walking tours of Lower Manhattan, and I kind of instantly thought we need to bring this story to City Hall right here.
Most Black people know where they were February 2018. Black Panther just dropped on the 16th of that month. It was a phenomenon. And here we are at the end of the month in City Hall, celebrating Black history in a space that doesn't look like Black folks even belong in there. We're talking about Black history and Black connectivity that night, and it felt really special. It felt like we were in a new chapter. 2 years later, we're in that same City Hall. There's no music, it's not full of people. In fact, for the first time in history, City Council was not convening in the oldest working city hall in the country. People are now using Epicenter to describe New York and the coronavirus and the pandemic. And we're in the space like, how do we continue to tell these stories? And what we decided to do was make a series of films. So regardless if you're in New York City or not, you can understand the Black experience through the eyes of City Hall. One of the first things you have to understand about New York is it has not one, but it's had 3 different city halls. It's been multiple eras that are all part of this island in this city's history, beginning with this being the unceded territories of the people of Lenapehoking, the Lenape. The Dutch arrived 1624, and for 40 years, this area is known as New Amsterdam or New Netherland. The English arrived in the year 1664, taking territory off of the Dutch and rename it New York City. The first city hall of the Dutch was actually on Pearl, close to Francis Tavern off of Broad Street, which would have been the eastern edge of the whole island. And the Dutch were showing up because they were more or less at war with the Spanish and the Portuguese and wanted to have an outpost here to continue their conflict with them, but also to trap beavers for commerce. Part of what you have is the Dutch are great at piracy. They're raiding different Portuguese slave ships, leaving Angola and the Congo, headed to Brazil or to the Caribbean. And so some of the first time you have Africans brought to this territory by European ships, they've been pirated from a Portuguese ship. So those people were company slaves because they thought it was wrong to own them directly. So some of the first Black people brought here are going to come from the Congo and Angola, who already have a century of experience working with Europeans who are Christian and making deals. So by the time they arrive here, one of the first things they're going to do is negotiate with the Dutch. What does it mean to be enslaved? And for the Dutch, they're saying you're company slaves, not owned by me, but owned by a company. This is where you begin to see some of the first unions in North America when these African people are negotiating what does it mean to be a company slave, as well as finding ways to get baptized and also get married and make different requests for land. And so this is a very interesting time in the history on this island where Black people are negotiating self-emancipation. So in 1664, when the English arrived on the direction of King Charles II and the namesake of New York, James Stewart, they take the town, and their first city hall is going to be the exact same city hall that the Dutch used, right there on Pearl Street on the eastern side of the island. And why are the English here? They're here to establish a commercial hub for the Royal Brothers' new slave trading business that also is going to sell commodities created by people who are enslaved. And so they want to take this territory away from the Dutch and use it as a commercial hub to get provisions and goods down to Barbados, Jamaica, Antigua. And so from the very beginning, New York City is connected to Black history because this was a town named after a slave trader using this area to get goods down to the West Indies. The second city hall of New York is going to be built around 1700. This is around the same time you're going to have the first Trinity Church built as well. And both of those buildings are in part built with enslaved labor, as well as the Wall Street that they're on was built by enslaved labor a generation prior. Also on Wall Street, you're going to have your first major slave market in New York City that was established by the Common Council in 1711. So a lot of this history can be felt even though you don't quite see it being presented in the public square. Before George Washington from Virginia began coming to New York, one of the most important people that was really like pushing the revolution discreetly was a guy named Samuel Francis, who in New York, you might not know his ethnicity because you walk by Samuel Francis Tavern and you'll see an image of George Washington. But this person is known to be of African descent. He was probably quite light-skinned and was passing for white. But if you go to places like Philadelphia, where he followed President Washington when the capital moved to Philadelphia, he's depicted as a person of African descent. They have a Black reenactor and also a painting of him as a Black person of mixed ancestry from the West Indies. It's only in New York do we have a public sign that obfuscates or makes it hard to understand what his racial identity was. It's important for us to acknowledge these Black New Yorkers who were also rebels like a Nathan Hale or a General Washington who don't have statues, but were very much a part of the beat of revolution that was established even before George Washington came to New York City. So the current City Hall, the third one that started in 1803 and was done somewhere around 1812, the cornerstone for it was laid at the southern tip of the African burial ground that existed during the time of New Amsterdam, as well as during British New York. So while you have these different city halls being built from 1653, 1700, 1803, there is an African burial ground here in New York City, but it's not until we get to our republic, the United States of America, do you have the southern edge of that burial ground actually being disturbed. So the African burial ground was rediscovered in 1991, just happened to be during the administration of New York City's first Black mayor. And so David Dinkins is somebody who really is going to push forward and make space for the African burial ground to be acknowledged because in many ways it's a federal site and the government wanted to continue building this, but it was halted because of the protests and activism of New Yorkers who wanted to make sure that this aspect of Black history was not forgotten and buried over. The actual monument of the African burial ground is a few acres. But if you actually understand that it goes by Broadway, it goes past Center Street, it goes north toward Worth, and it also goes south toward City Hall. And it holds the remains of about 19,000 people were there. And about 419 were taken out and have been studied and were also reinterred at that site. And that's why when you walk there, you'll see the different mounds there on the memorial. But those remains in many respects are still there and have been disturbed by all the other buildings around it. The African burial ground is actually on federal property, but the Triumph of the Human Spirit, which is across the street in Foley Square in front of the courthouse, is a city project. And so during the time of David Dinkins, when he was mayor, this is the first thing that actually got completed after his term was over by artist Lorenzo Pace. And what it does is celebrate the heart of people who survived that migration over here to the United States of African descent. But it also acknowledges people who are indigenous to these areas too. So you have two major architects of City Hall. You have John McComb and Joseph Francois Mongeon. Mongeon is interesting in many ways because he comes to New York from what was Saint-Domingue during the Haitian Revolution. And so I just think him arriving here is a part of this era of Black rebellion that is resisting enslavement. And in fact, it creates, in many ways, the way our City Hall looks, because he's one of the major architects of the City Hall, but he's also leaving from a space that is being transformed by rebellion. New York has been pretty amazing at burying a lot of this history. The fact that New York City is named after a slave trader, has this large African burial ground, most New Yorkers right now don't know that. But what you discover over time is that you can bury over a site, bury over a building, knock something down and cover it up, but you can't bury spirit.